Imagine you're driving home late at night. Maybe you're coming back from dinner, from a friend's house, or just running a quick errand. Suddenly, flashing lights appear behind you. Your heart rate jumps a little, you pull over, and a police officer walks up to your window. Then comes a question that sounds completely harmless. Where are you coming from tonight? It sounds casual, almost friendly, like small talk. The kind of question someone might ask in a normal conversation. But here's the reality most people don't realize. That question is rarely just small talk. In many situations, it's actually a setup. One simple answer can quietly shift a routine traffic stop into something much bigger. A warning can turn into a search. A short interaction can turn into a DUI investigation. And sometimes what feels like an innocent conversation can even lead to a criminal case. The truth is, most people get themselves into trouble during traffic stops not because they did something illegal, but because they start talking too much. So in this video, you're going to learn something incredibly valuable. You're going to learn the exact one-sentence response you can use if a police officer asks where you're coming from. A simple line that keeps you polite, keeps the situation calm, and most importantly, protects your rights. And make sure you stay until the end, because I'll also give you the backup line to use when the officer starts pushing for answers. And trust me, sometimes they will push, not because they're bad people, but because it's part of their training. Police officers are trained to ask questions. They are trained to gather information. And sometimes, when they don't get the answers they expect, they may push harder. That's just the reality of how these interactions work. But the good news is this: you don't have to get angry, defensive, or confrontational. You just need to know how to respond the right way. In this video, we're going to break down 3 very important things. First, why police officers ask the question, "Where are you coming from?" Second, the exact sentence you should say instead. And third, the 3 most common mistakes people make during these moments that can turn a simple stop into a huge problem. Let's start with the first part, because once you understand the psychology behind the question, everything starts to make a lot more sense. When an officer asks, "Where are you coming from?" they're usually trying to accomplish one of 3 things. The first reason is building a timeline. Think about it from their perspective. If you respond with something like, "I'm coming from my friend's house," that immediately opens the door for more questions. Which friend? How long were you there? What were you doing? Did you drink anything? What time did you leave? Before you know it, you've created an entire timeline of your evening. Every detail you give becomes something that can later be written down in a police report. And here's the important part. Once something is written down, it can be checked later. If your story changes even slightly, or if something doesn't match up perfectly, that can suddenly create suspicion. All from one simple answer. The second reason officers ask this question is location association. Your answer might unintentionally connect you to a place that raises more suspicion. For example, if you say, "I'm coming from a bar," you've just given the officer a reason to start thinking about a DUI investigation, even if you didn't drink, even if you're completely sober. The moment the word bar enters the conversation, the officer may start looking for signs of impairment. Or maybe you mention a neighborhood known for crime activity. Suddenly, you're being mentally associated with that area. Again, all because of one simple answer. The third reason is something called a comfort test. This is pure psychology. When people feel nervous, they tend to talk more. They try to explain things. They add extra details. They start filling silence with information. And the more someone talks, the more information there is to analyze. More details mean more chances for inconsistencies. And inconsistencies can quickly turn into reasonable suspicion. I've seen it happen countless times. Someone gets nervous during a traffic stop, starts talking too much, and accidentally creates problems that didn't exist before. Here's the key point you need to understand. You are not required to help the police build a story about your evening. You generally do not have to answer questions about where you're coming from, where you're going, what you were doing, or anything about your day. So what should you say instead? Here's the exact sentence that works incredibly well in these situations. Say this calmly, politely, and without any attitude. "Officer, I'm not going to answer any questions about my day. I'm happy to provide my license, registration, and insurance." That's it. Short, clear, respectful. No argument, no story, no extra details, just a simple boundary. And this sentence works so well because it accomplishes 3 important things at the same time. First, it shows cooperation where cooperation is required. You're making it clear that you're willing to provide your driver's license, registration, and insurance. Second, it establishes a boundary. You're politely declining to answer questions that you're not legally required to answer. And third, it protects you from saying something that might later be misunderstood, misinterpreted, or used against you. Now it's important to understand something else about traffic stops. Police officers are absolutely allowed to ask questions during a stop. And many of these conversations happen long before Miranda rights ever come into play. In fact, the courts have generally allowed officers to ask a wide variety of roadside questions. They might ask things like, "Where are you coming from? Where are you headed tonight? Is there anything in the car I should know about? Any weapons or drugs in the vehicle? Have you had anything to drink tonight?" And you might be surprised how often people answer these questions in ways that cause serious problems. There are countless police reports where someone volunteered information that immediately changed the situation. Someone says, "Yeah, I have a little marijuana in the car." Or, "I do have a gun in the vehicle, but I probably shouldn't." Or, "I had a couple beers earlier." In many of those situations, the officer had no reason to suspect anything before that statement was made. But once the information is volunteered, everything changes. That's why your best strategy is simple. Don't provide unnecessary information. Don't rely on the idea that Miranda rights will protect you later. Protect yourself in the moment by choosing your words carefully. Let's do a quick role play so you can see exactly how this might play out. Imagine the officer asks, "Where are you coming from tonight?" Your response should be calm and simple. "Officer, I'm not going to answer any questions about my day. I'm happy to provide my license, registration, and insurance." The officer might respond with something like, "So you're refusing to answer my questions? That sounds suspicious." You remain calm and say, "I understand. I plead the fifth. Here are my documents." Then the officer might ask another question. "Have you had anything to drink tonight?" Your response stays the same. "I plead the fifth." "Where are you headed?" "I plead the fifth." Notice what's happening here. You're not arguing. You're not insulting the officer. You're not escalating the situation. You're simply choosing not to provide information that could be used against you. Now let's talk about 3 mistakes that happen all the time during traffic stops. Mistake number 1 is what people call just being honest. Someone might say, "I'm coming from Chili's. I had 2 or 3 beers, but I'm totally fine to drive." The person might truly believe they're helping by being transparent, but that statement can instantly become the most important line in the police report. Now the officer has a reason to investigate further. You may be asked to step out of the vehicle. You might be asked to perform field sobriety tests. You may eventually face breath or blood testing depending on the laws in your state. Even if you're perfectly sober, the situation just became much more complicated. Mistake number 2 is over-explaining. Some people respond to a simple question with a full story. The officer asks where you're coming from, and suddenly you're delivering a 5-minute explanation. Nervous people tend to talk more, and the more details you provide, the more opportunities there are for contradictions. Maybe you say you left your friend's house at 10:15. Later you mention it might have been closer to 10:30. Now there's an inconsistency. Small contradictions can create suspicion. Suspicion can lead to further investigation. If you're someone who tends to talk a lot when nervous, recognizing that habit can save you a lot of trouble during a traffic stop. And the third mistake is sarcasm. Some people try to be funny or clever when answering police questions. An officer asks, "Where are you coming from?" Someone replies, "None of your business." Or worse, they respond with a joke like, "Your mom's house." Yes, some of those responses might feel satisfying in the moment, and sometimes they're even funny, but sarcasm can quickly change the tone of the interaction. You might technically be within your rights, but escalating the situation emotionally can still make the encounter much harder than it needs to be. When dealing with police, calm professionalism is always the better approach. Now let's talk about what to do if the officer keeps pushing for answers. Sometimes an officer might say something like, "Why won't you answer the question? What are you hiding?" This is where your backup line comes in. Your response can simply be, "Officer, I plead the fifth. Am I free to go?" That sentence does 2 important things. First, it clearly invokes your constitutional right to remain silent. Second, it politely asks whether the stop is finished. You're not arguing about the Constitution on the side of the road. You're simply asserting your rights and checking if the interaction is over. In some cases, the officer may still keep you there while they complete the traffic stop process. That's normal. But by repeating your calm response, you've stopped the conversation from turning into a fishing expedition. There's also one more detail people often ask about. Do you have to give your name when police stop you? The answer depends on the laws in your state. Some states have what are called stop and identify laws. In those states, during certain detentions, you may be required to identify yourself. In other places, the rules are slightly different. But there is one thing that's consistent almost everywhere. If you're driving a vehicle and you're stopped for a traffic violation, you must provide your driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance. That's part of the legal responsibility of driving. So the smart move during a traffic stop is simple. Provide the required documents, decline unnecessary questions, and keep the interaction calm and professional. Your body language also plays an important role. Keep your hands visible, ideally on the steering wheel. Lower your window enough to communicate clearly. Move slowly if you need to reach for something, and let the officer know what you're doing. For example, I'm reaching for my wallet. And another important point, never consent to a search of your vehicle unless you truly intend to. If officers have legal grounds to search, they'll do so, but you don't have to volunteer permission. Throughout the interaction, the key is consistency. Use the same calm line each time. The goal isn't to win a debate with the officer. The real goal is to end the interaction without giving away unnecessary information. So let's quickly recap everything we talked about. If a police officer asks, "Where are you coming from?" your response can be, "Officer, I'm not going to answer any questions about my day. I'm happy to provide my license, registration, and insurance." If the officer keeps pushing, your backup response is simple. "I plead the fifth. Am I free to go?" Those two sentences alone can dramatically change how a traffic stop unfolds. Knowing your rights, staying calm, and choosing your words carefully can make a huge difference. If you found this information helpful, make sure you subscribe to the channel, House Sites Legal Insight USA, because we regularly break down real legal situations and explain how the law works in everyday life. And I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. Leave a comment below and tell me, have you ever been asked this question during a traffic stop? Your experiences and questions help shape future videos, and I read every comment. Thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next video.